We begin our broadcast on the beat with breaking news. I'm holding a letter that I just received that is President Donald Trump's personal intervention into the Michael Cohen matter, his lawyer, who's under criminal investigation, as we've confirmed. Panel stays with me, Seth Waxman, a former federal prosecutor, I believe we've just added to the conversation. What does this mean to you?
Well, I think that clearly these can be conflating these issues. I mean, you have the President of the United States who's now going to need to take time to answer questions with his lawyer and decide whether this material is privileged. So, as we all may know, the privilege belongs to the client, not the attorney. So if there are emails in there, for example, with Mr. Trump sending Mr. Cohen to Russia to open a Trump Tower in Moscow, on the face of that, that doesn't seem to be privileged. That sounds like a business transaction. So Mr. Trump's going to need to explain to his lawyers how that could be seeking legal advice, because if it's not privileged.
Let me read a little more just for Seth from the letter and then go back around the horn. Again, this is brand new, Seth. The firm here, and again, they're speaking on behalf of the president here tonight, says our own associates are well qualified. They hail from the country's best law schools. They've worked directly with partners at our firm on confidential government investigations, civil litigation, or both. A reference to their ability to go through this material they want before the feds have it with regard to the attorney-client privilege that the president may have. And then they say, our client, that's Donald Trump, will make himself available as needed to aid in our privilege review on his behalf. What does that even mean, Seth? Would that be Donald Trump and Michael Cohen and these other lawyers sitting around in New York looking at old emails?
Well, I think practically speaking, what you'd have is these associates and more junior attorneys doing the initial scrub, kind of getting rid of the chafe and all the emails that are non-controversial. And when you get down to the ones that, you know, are damaging or, you know, have some questions as to the privilege, someone's going to need to compile what we would call in our world key documents, walk them over to the president and present them to him and walk through how these documents are privileged or not privileged, and if there's evidence of a crime in some of those emails.
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, my friend, but I'm not sure that in this instance the client would be the final word on the legal privilege.
Well, he clearly would not. Ultimately, that'd be up to the special master and the judge, but his lawyers are going to need to put a colorable claim in front of that special master and ultimately maybe the judge, or it's for naught. And the only person that can really tell his lawyers, you know, what was the intent behind these emails, or what was the legal purpose of these emails, or the best person, I should say, is the president. In your view, is this weird? It is weird. It is definitely weird. Okay. I mean, I've done this with CEOs, and I will tell you, there is nothing worse than a lawyer having to get the time of a Fortune 500 CEO and say, you know, Mr. Johnson or Mrs. Johnson, I want to sit down with you and start going through hundreds of documents. Their eyes glaze over, and they've got more important things to do. I can only imagine the more important things that the President of the United States needs to do, but obviously he's injecting himself because there's something very important to him in this process. Something important to him. I want to bring Seth Waxman back into the point on why we're learning what we're learning, because the only reason that the Washington Post is breaking this story is they feel firm about it. I could tell you Bob Mueller's personal negotiations, the things that are important enough that he sits down, and you see the headline breaking right now, Giuliani reopens negotiations about presidential interview with Mueller, but cautions special counsel that Trump remains resistant. I mean, that headline is really interesting, Seth, because it's got a lot of talk about attorney-client privilege. It's got a lot of very private material packed into a depiction of what's going on. And I want to read from a former DOJ official, Matt Miller, who many of our viewers know. He worked under the Obama administration. He's responding to this right now, posting on Twitter, congrats to Giuliani on doing such a good job professionalizing the Trump legal team that it took a full 24 hours for your negotiations with Mueller to leak to the press. Speak to that angle of critique. Well, all defense lawyers would prefer all this stay behind closed doors. So if we're 24 hours in and now this is already being leaked out to the public, you know, that's not ideal for the defense side. So I agree with Mr. Miller there. But, you know, we're heading down the same path it seems we were about a month or two ago, where we're heading towards this conflict between Mueller and Mr. Trump, the president, in this under oath testimony. And that is fraught with all kinds of perils. And I still question whether he is actually going to do that. And really his only way out is to plead the fifth. I know Mr. Giuliani carries a lot of weight, and he has a lot of credibility, being the former U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York and the mayor. But at the end of the day, he's not going to be able to prevent the president from sitting in that room. The only thing that can do that is the Fifth Amendment.
This story is breaking right now, and if viewers look on the bottom of their screen, they'll see that we're crediting the Washington Post, which broke the Giuliani story. I want to ask you and Seth the hardest question in the land these days, which is, what is Bob Mueller thinking? Seth?
Yeah, I can tell you, I think Bob Mueller and his team are licking their chops. I mean, this is what prosecutors wait for, the opportunity to cross-examine and question the target, or at least in this case, we know subject of their investigation. And it's in those circumstances, which Mr. Trump has been in before in the sense of depositions, but nothing is like sitting in a room with a bunch of federal prosecutors and FBI agents not knowing exactly where they're going, maybe not knowing exactly what documents they have, and sitting there for hours and hours and answering questions. And the last point I'd make is, you know, while this idea of obstruction may be out there and maybe that's being dangled as an idea to get him in the room, I find it highly questionable that Mr. Mueller would stop at that point and not, you know, investigate or question him on the underlying crime, potential underlying crime, which of course is the conspiracy between the Russians and the Trump campaign to influence the 2016 election, or at least the allegations of that. So, in my opinion, if Mr. Trump walks into that room, everything is going to be on the table. And those prosecutors are going to be loaded to bear.
I'm going to break in because I'm holding a new document filed by Trump lawyer Michael Cohen within the last 5 minutes, and it says, based on the advice of counsel, Michael Cohen, quote, I will assert my Fifth Amendment rights in connections with all proceedings in the Stormy Daniels case due to, he says, the ongoing criminal investigation by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Again, if you're just joining us, Trump lawyer Michael Cohen asserting in writing in court for the first time he will plead the Fifth, something that you do because on the advice of counsel or based on what you know about what you've done, you don't want to confess to a crime. Seth?
Of course he is. Of course he is. You have a federal prosecution or investigation centering in on you. Your home, your apartment, your hotel room has been raided, and you've got some civil lawsuit out there. I mean, I know in the context of this case, that civil lawsuit is getting all kinds of attention, but a civil proceeding is far, far down the line and in degrees of importance when your life and your liberty are at stake in the Southern District of New York. So, of course, he is pleading the Fifth because he's got to do everything he can to protect himself right now.
Mr. President, what about Michael Cohen? Are you considering a
Thank you very much. Stupid question.
Seth, what do you think about that response?
Well, the pardon has always been the X factor in this case. You know, in a normal criminal case, with the evidence against Paul Manafort, one would have thought he would have already flipped, much like Mr. Gates. So why hasn't Paul Manafort flipped? You know, has Mr. Trump conveyed to him in words or substance that pardon is out there? So I think that the reporter who asked that question is asking a very relevant question, and Mr. Trump's deflection of that or refusal to answer it may beg the question of, you know, more about the pardon than it answers. So, you know, I've always thought that the pardon question in this matter, whether it's for Paul Manafort or Michael Cohen and the pardons that he's now issued to Scooter Libby, is really the X factor that no criminal defense lawyer or criminal prosecutor can really answer, because it's something that only the President of the United States holds the power to do. And the only constraint in my mind on that pardon power is obstruction of justice. And that would be ultimately, in my opinion, something that would be decided by the Congress in an impeachment proceeding. That is outside the normal courtroom that, you know, all the lawyers that are talking and speaking on TV and representing these players really have ever been involved in.
No, and that's where a lot of the questions go and why the president is unlike any other client. If you're joining the beat, we have been covering over half an hour straight of breaking news with Rudy Giuliani meeting with Bob Mueller, promising a presidential interview with President Trump's lawyer Michael Cohen, saying for the first time in a sworn statement he will plead the Fifth on the grounds that he might incriminate himself in the Stormy Daniels matter, as well as the news breaking here that President Trump says he will personally get involved in the Michael Cohen case by reviewing materials to avoid the feds having them because of alleged attorney-client privilege. All of that here in the last half hour or so. So my special thanks to a special panel, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Dorgan, Gene Robinson, Seth Waxman, Mike Lupica. We've really benefited from your insights on what is a breaking story. You can't make it up if it's breaking.